people, open your eyes and answer the call of the drum. Frelimo, Frelibu, Samora Machel, Samora Machel has come. Maputo, Maputo, home of the brave, our nation will soon be as one. Frelimo, Frelimo, Samora Machel, Samora Machel has won.
Good evening, everyone, and welcome to tonight's book launch. We're so excited, so happy to have you here. Thank you for your presence. My name is Loveland Wadei, and I will be your facilitator for tonight's conversation. But before we go any further, I want to hand over to Dr. Piyushi Kotesha, who's the CEO of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Foundation. She will take us through the welcome and we can get started with our evening. Thanks, Piyushi. Piyushi, your video and your camera is off.
Oh dear.
There we go. We can hear you.
You can hear me, but you can't see me. Is that right?
Yes, yes.
Okay.
Yes.
And for some reason, the camera has gone off the link. Good evening, everybody. Thank you, Llewellyn, for the introduction. I'd like to welcome everybody to this evening's two-part event. This has been quite an extraordinary partnership between the Desmond Tutu Center at UWC, the German constituency and Bread for Life, as well as the Desmond and Leah Tutu Foundation. For us at the foundation, it has been a truly synergistic partnership, and it really is the first event which is going to launch our celebrations, our lead up, if you like, to the events for the Archer's 90th birthday on the 7th of October. What we're about to hear tonight is a very, very rich, textured and wonderful encounters that all our guests, all our authors have contributed with regard to this extraordinary book, which has come out just in time for the Archer's birthday. More importantly, the foundation has developed a new strategic direction and a new plan. And one of the main reasons we partnered in this is because it fits in so beautifully with our Knowledge Legacy program, which is really aimed at mining the rich knowledge that the Arch has left in his wide footprint across many countries and around the world, and not least of all, South Africa. So we're going to be hearing a selection of contributions, and thereafter we'll be entering into one of the programs that the foundation hosts on a regular basis, which is called the Courageous Conversation Program. And the aim of the Courageous Conversation Program is to really take on bold and difficult topics and really unearth the issues as well as critique them, and as well as take us to another level. So I'm hoping that tonight we will be jettisoned onto another level, and that we will be examining the rationale for the church as an important institution, and how in the past it contributed as a site of struggle, but at the same time some of the challenges that the church and church faces in today's society. Those challenges we know are multifold and of a deep nature. So I hope that everyone's going to be very bold in their contributions this evening. So congratulations to our partners. It's been a wonderful journey, and today we open out in a bold conversation with the rest of the world. Lastly, I won't probably get a chance to speak again. This is all about listening and others contributing, us having provided the essential platform here, and that I take the opportunity to mention that the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation Peace Lecture, the 11th International Desmond Tutu Peace Lecture, will take place at 7 p.m. on the 7th of October, and it will be followed by joyous conversations between our Archbishop and the Dalai Lama. So I hope that all of you join us on that very important day, a day of celebration, but also a day that will look at issues to do with the theme of truth to power, no future without justice. So having said that, I'm going to hand over back to you, Loveland, with regard to the rest of the program. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so very much. Thank you very much for that introduction and just giving us some context about where this fits into the bigger celebrations that are currently happening. So there are so many people who've joined us from all over the world, and I want to invite you to indicate in the chat what your name is, where in the world you're joining this event from, and even if you'd like to greet us in your language, you can maybe just pop that into the chat, and we can just get a sense of how far and wide people who've been affected by Archbishop Desmond Tutu's life, just where they all are. So please do feel free to pop that in the chat so long. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to just allow for the UWC choir, and then I'll hand over to Prof. Sarojini Nadar. She is the chairperson of the Desmond Tutu Center at the University of the Western Cape. Thanks so much.
Thank you. Emhlabeni sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla bawo Thixo somandla sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla bawo Thixo somandla sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla inesingela isololo isithi sayithwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla inesingela isololo isithi sayithwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla bawo Thixo somandla sibuthwele ubunzima sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla bawo Thixo somandla sibuthwele ubunzima sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla inesingela isololo isithi sayithwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla inesingela isololo isithi sayithwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla bawo Thixo somandla sibuthwele ubunzima sibuthwele ubunzima bawo Thixo somandla.
Beautiful. Thank you so much to the UWC choir. Prof. Sarojini, can I hand over to you to take us through the next piece?
Thank you so much, Loveland. I can't seem to put my camera on because it says that the host, which I should be, has stopped my camera. So I think I've just handed over all power, which is lovely. It's about sharing power.
You know what we could do? If
Yeah.
maybe just the host could ask you to start your video, then it should enable you to do that. So the host can maybe assist us with that so long whilst you go ahead.
Yeah, sure. So we don't want to waste too much time. So let me just say what an absolute joy it is to start the celebration this evening. And so depending on where in the world you are joining us from today, good afternoon, good evening, and for some of you, I think it's even good morning. On behalf of the editors of the book, let me greet you all warmly from the Desmond Tutu Center for Religion and Social Justice here at the University of the Western Cape. And let me welcome you to the celebration of the launch of our book, Ecumenical Encounters with Desmond Mpilo Tutu, Visions for Justice, Dignity, and Peace. I'm gonna ask Hardy to please ensure that my camera is on because I want to show you all the book. It's the first copy that, oh, there we go. It's the proof copy that I'm holding in my hand. So this is the book that we're here to celebrate tonight. And it's an absolute joy to have this in our hands. So welcome, and welcome also to the week of celebrations that we have honoring the life of a remarkable 90-year-old human, our beloved Archbishop Tutu. We know that he is watching because in an earlier test run, poor Tutu is sitting with her dad at the moment, had him wave to all of us. So just to let you know that he is in the room and is watching tonight. So I find it difficult to observe protocol even in embodied spaces, but it is even more difficult to do so in virtual spaces. So I will make the disclaimer that we in South Africa are very used to, and that is all protocol observed. Having said that, we know that some animals are more equal than others. And so I do want to acknowledge, because I think it is special to acknowledge both the presence of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu tonight. And as I said, he's here, but also our Vice Chancellor and Rector of the University of the Western Cape, Professor Tyron Pretorius. Professor Pretorius, I think your camera is on. Can you at least wave to us? Thanks, Professor Pretorius. I'm not sure if you did or not. I also want to welcome the current Chancellor of the University of the Western Cape, Archbishop Thabo Makgoba. For those of you who are not aware, Archbishop Emeritus Tutu served as Chancellor at the University of the Western Cape, known also as the intellectual home of the left. He served as Chancellor for almost 25 years. And so it is indeed very special that not only do we get to honor him at UWC in this way, but also that UWC Press has co-published the book with Regnum Publishers in Oxford. Okay, so I think that's what we are done with the protocol. So let me say again what a joy it is to celebrate the launch of this book that came into being in the remarkable space of 7 months. Those of you who received your first call to papers would recall that it came on the 1st of March, and we've been able to complete it. So that has been a remarkable achievement, and I think we can all be quite proud of ourselves. When planning the launch, we knew that it would be a great challenge to do so virtually. After all, how does one hold space for 72 contributions in an online event? I mean, that's really, really difficult. And I'm looking at my screen here, and we have over 150 participants. And that's just participants besides the authors and the editors. So that was a big ask to us, you know, to be able to do this launch virtually. But we wanted you to get as clear a glimpse of the remarkable portraits and personal encounters that are presented in this book. This was not easy, so what we did was to ask selected contributors to the book to read extracts from their chapters, right? Now that's easy enough, and that's normally done in a book launch, but here's the catch. we also asked them to film themselves doing so and to send them these videos to us so that we could combine them together in a short documentary type film. So while it sounds easy enough, boy, did it take a lot of effort. I got some unanticipated film production training in the process. But overall, we have the video that we're going to share with you tonight so that you can get a glimpse of the contents of this book. And so just be kind and know that we are all quite amateurs in this process, and we're still learning our way around this act of filmmaking. I want to also thank the authors and editors for their Oscar-winning performances in recording themselves reading, and you're going to get a glimpse of that now. We are truly grateful to you for your willingness to step outside of your comfort zones and to make these recordings. So I want to say up front, and Loveland, you're going to introduce the video shortly, but it is a long video. It is 45 minutes long, so brace yourselves. What I can assure you, though, is that at the end of the video, you will have an overarching kaleidoscope view of the contents of the book. So sit back, grab some popcorn or coffee or glass or two of whatever your favorite beverage is, and enjoy this film documentary on our book. And afterward, Loveland is going to facilitate a courageous conversation about that. So thank you, Loveland.
Thank you so much, Prof. Sarojini. That's great to hear just how much effort went into this. I would say you are definitely heroes to have published something in such a short space of time, but it's really an indication of what a labor of love this has been. So as mentioned, there will be a video playing for you now. I do want to say that after the video has played, we are going to open up for some conversation with the editors and thereafter with some of the authors. And so as you watch the video, if there are questions that are emerging for you, if there are things that you would like to double click on, if there are things you want to reflect some more on, you're welcome to use the Q&A function, and you can pop your questions in there so that when we open up for the courageous conversation, we can also refer to any questions emerging from the audience. So feel free to use that Q&A function. But I think I'm happy for us to get started. So if we can play that video and let's see what our contributors have put together.
What an enormous privilege it has been to collect, compile, and edit this inspiring and insightful collection of 72 reflections on the life and witness of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu. What began as an initiative of two German theologians, Rudolf Heinz and Dietrich Werner, developed into a collaborative book project with myself, Tuniko Maluleke, and Vicentia Kabe, who had already been working on similar projects within our own spheres of work. The South African editors joined the collaboration with the understanding that the editorial relationship will be characterized by principles of mutuality and reciprocity and a deep respect for an intersectional decolonial framing. As such, it was important for us to emphasize a diversity of voices, regions, and thematic content in line with the Arch's lifelong commitment to not just make more space at the table, but to graciously extend and thereby courageously transform the shape of the table. Many of the younger contributors have never met Desmond Tutu in person, but their work for justice and their scholarship and witness have been inspired by him and his work even from a distance. The book is divided into 3 major sections, focusing broadly on the themes of justice, dignity, and peace. The topics of engagement range from anti-racist struggles to sexual diversity rights, as well as robust critical debates about reconciliation and restitution. We hope that as you engage with the encounters with the Arch through the pages of this marvelous book, you will find insights and inspiration for your own praxis and visions for justice, dignity, and peace.
Greetings from the old granary in Cape Town, South Africa, the home of the Desmond and Leah Tutu Legacy Foundation. The chief goal of the Legacy Foundation is to safeguard and promote the living legacy of Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu and Mrs. Tutu for posterity. It is our determination to ensure that this legacy should be galvanized in a rich, powerful, textured tapestry of hope and learning worldwide. This book in many ways represents some of the most significant strands of that textured tapestry, especially from the rich and precious archives that document the time that the Arch spent working in various ecumenical settings, including the South African Council of Churches, the All-African Council of Churches, and the World Council of Churches in the late 70s and early 80s. This was a profoundly formative period in his life, and the sincere and heartwarming ecumenical recollections of this era from his counterparts internationally, continentally, and locally is certainly a timely addition to the wealth of publications which depict the remarkable legacy of the Arch. We are extremely proud to be associated with this initiative, as it aligns harmoniously with the Foundation's Knowledge Legacy program and is a timely addition to the thematic area of the Church as a site of struggle in our forthcoming permanent exhibition titled Truth to Power.
It was difficult to divide the book into thematic focus areas because each of the contributions overlap in multiple ways. This is testament to the far-reaching and wide-ranging commitments that the Arch has held close to his heart over the years. That being said, we broadly categorized the contributions into the 3 visions which we chose for the book, namely justice, dignity, and peace. What emerges from almost every single one of the 70 contributions is that his visions for justice, dignity, and peace are present, not in spite of his deep spirituality and sense of prayer, but because of it. This element of spirituality is therefore the sacred thread that weaves each of the pieces of this tapestry of the Arch's life together. The first theme chosen for the book was justice. Within this theme, we had 3 sub-themes focusing on racism and resistance against apartheid, liberation theology and theological education and gender justice, and sexual diversity. Alan Busak speaks of the importance of hope as an inspiration for struggle against intersectional injustices.
Desmond Tutu, the man, his theology, his ministry, his life's work, all are almost synonymous with the word hope. Throughout the many years we have worked together in the church and in the struggle for freedom, this is the one thing he tenaciously clung to, tirelessly preached and unerringly symbolized. It made him more than just a proverbial beacon of hope. Hope is not passively waiting, nor is it deceitfully pontificating, pulling the wool over the eyes of a people desperate for change. It is stepping into the breach, into the heat of the struggle, despite the wounds I know that are coming, because it is worth it. It is what people in the grip of integrity, honesty, and decency do. So, despite the present darkness of this age of re-embraced and reinforced apartheid, the betrayals of corruption, the greed and hunger for power, the empty grandiosity, the privileges and entitlement that mark our political aristocracy. Despite all the disappointments and disillusionments, the deceit and the broken promises, and yet another loss of innocence. Despite the fears and uncertainties because of a devastating pandemic and the darkening shadows of our valleys of death. I think of Jesus and the women and Thomas. I remember the youth and our revolution, and like Desmond Tutu, through the pain, the cries, and the bewilderments, I too see Sunday coming, and I will turn my face toward the rising sun.
In the second sub-theme, under the section of Justice, Liberation Theology and Theological Education, several authors note that a key area for transformation and justice was in the area of theological education. Many of the essays in this book point to the critical role that Desmond Tutu played in theological education in the 20th century, especially in his position as Associate Director of the Theological Education Fund, TEF, between 1972 and 1975. Several authors note that his desire to transform theological education towards a more critical and justice-oriented paradigm was born out of his extensive travels through almost all the countries in Africa, as well as his sojourns to Latin America, where he encountered liberation theology. In many ways, these encounters led to his own transformation too. In my own essay in this book, I note how Tutu was deeply dedicated and unwavering in his commitment to create a holistic theological education that developed the student not just spiritually, but also critically. In one of his travel reports in May 1975, Tutu demonstrates the kind of student that Tutu sought to develop through a critical theological education. Tutu said, "Our theological education must set out before it is too late to develop the whole personality of the theological student, and especially his or her critical awareness, which has a passion and a reverence for truth, and will not be cajoled or threatened to believe something to be true unless it recommends itself as a reasonable thing to conclude on the basis of available evidence. It will make them ask awkward questions and not be merely conforming, and only thus they can ever hope to be creative. Only those ready to challenge the existing orthodoxies have ever advanced man's or women's knowledge. Only those who have developed a passion for truth can ultimately be expected to become prophetic leaders, to speak out against unrighteousness and injustice and oppression without fear and without favor."
In 1973, I stayed at the headquarters of the Theological Education Fund, TEF, in Bromley to do archival studies. It was a chance for me that at the same time Desmond Tutu was Associate Director of the TEF. For him, The early 70s were a time of theological reorientation based on insights gained during his extensive travels through virtually all countries of Africa. Then, the TEF gave the decisive impulse for the development of theology in context. That was the birth of contextual theology, which has since spread worldwide.
The contextuality of reflections gathered from Desmond Tutu's work travel underline his aversion towards universalizing discourses. It is a thread that runs through his work, and one that is especially evident in accounts of how he grappled with Black theology and liberation theology against the backdrop of Western theologies. Evidently, to him, to know the specificity of a locality or of a person is to accord them dignity by naming them with reference to their reality and locating theological reflection within that reality.
A hallmark of Desmond Tutu's characterization as a political priest was his commitment to intersectional struggles for justice. In my own essay in the book, I note that when he was elected as the first Black Metropolitan of the Anglican Church of Southern Africa and Archbishop of Cape Town, on his enthronement, he set the tone for his archiepiscopacy by identifying 3 pressing issues that had his attention for his tenure. He identified this as 1, ending apartheid, 2, ordination of women, and 3, full inclusion of LGBTQIA+ people in the church. Undergirding these goals for his tenure was precisely the recognition of how injustices intersect. The Arch's commitment to gender equity is most visibly discernible in his support for the nation of women priests. In all of the pertinent and personal accounts presented by Eliza Gedman, Renee August, and Wilma Jacobson, we see the formative role that the Arch played in each of their discernments to their vocation and calling as women priests in a patriarchal church. It is unfortunate that the last of his goals for sexual diversity rights and justice within the church remain unrealized to this day.
So many of us here in the United States have found succor and encouragement in Archbishop Desmond Tutu's support for LGBTQIA rights and freedom and equality. The audacious resource of this long-standing public commitment by Archbishop Tutu has provided particular sustenance for the hungry minds and spirits of U.S. American Black activists facing deep betrayals by our Black Christian clergy opponents and others in our community contexts. In the face of their arguments claiming the space of authentic Blackness and morally virtuous Christianity as exclusively homophobic and heterosexist, Archbishop Tutu's countering exercise of moral authority grounded in awe-inspiring anti-apartheid Black African church leadership has been a bulwark of empowerment for us. Gratitude is due for the reliability and strength of the bountiful transnational Christian resource of solidarity he has supplied. I want to thank Archbishop Tutu.
What I describe in my chapter of the book, I heard from my grandmother, Ursula Trautwein, and found in a biography of my grandfather, Dieter Trautwein. In my family, we are repeating since decades the story that when Desmond Tutu was visiting my grandparents' house and listened to my grandmother's story of action against apartheid right in the center of Frankfurt, he said to her, "My goodness, I'm happy I'm not your enemy." We are all telling this story with a secret pride that the great Bishop Desmond Tutu was visiting my grandparents and paid his respect to their commitment against the apartheid regime. I wrote about the memories of my grandmother, Ursula Trautwein, co-founder of the Frankfurt Women Against Apartheid, who were driven by the conviction that international ecumenism could support each other across borders.
The painting is based on an image from the celebration of my marriage to Marceline. My dad had been quite ill at the time and was looking rather frail. My mom, sitting next to him in her orange, looks very vibrant and vivacious and very strong and alive. I think the image makes visible something that is always present, though not always visible. My dad, whenever he receives an award, will thank my mom and will say that it is something that they have shared throughout their lives, apart from his faith. The source of my dad's strength has been my mom.
In his chapter in this book, Paul Österreicher asks, from what does Desmond draw his strength? I have no doubt from a disciplined life of prayer. He often surprises others by spontaneously turning to prayer, with and for them, sometimes joyfully, at others tearfully. What was crucial for us as editors to note is that this disciplined life of prayer and spirituality did not inspire a passive, contemplative life that was free of the moral imperative to fight injustices. Many contributors, such as Christian Balzleck-Olsen and Gerhard Rhein, for example, illustrate such encounters in their reflections, where they recall this invitation to prayer in both a government setting as well as a media briefing. Peter Lodberg's essay also provides important reflections on the links between prayer and acts for justice, when he tells the story of how Desmond Tutu opened an important government meeting with the Minister of Foreign Affairs in Denmark in prayer. He aptly titled his essay, When Prayer Meets Politics.
Holy Spirit of God, you blow where you will. You are complete freedom. Space and time cannot contain you. You are there when we are born, when we shout our first breath. You are there when we die, when we sigh our last breath. You are always with us, in us, between us, among us, even though we may not always be conscious of your presence. Yes, you are the ever-present yes of all creation. Yes, you are present at the dawn of creation. Yes, you are present with the Khoi and the San people, the indigenous people of the land. Yes, you are present with the lepers and the missionaries. Yes, you were present when the humanity of some were questioned. Yes, you were present when that same humanity was affirmed as co-equal, interdependent, worthy of being celebrated. Yes, you are the presence of our Ubuntu, of beloved community. Yes, you are the spirit of justice, peace, and reconciliation. And now with all creation, we sing your unending praise.
There are many doors to the divine presence. Each has its own unique architecture, qualities, and aesthetics. Particular slants and textures here, variable shapes and solidities there, shifting timbers and tones, distinctive cadences and scents, drawing some of us to one path and beckoning others to another. Sometimes these doors are religions and spiritual pathways, and sometimes they are human beings. Every now and then, a rare soul provides a portal of such magnificent beauty and spiritual fragrance that the neighbors look out of their windows and marvel, and might even dance ecstatically at such loveliness. Some might sing in admiration and awe, Alhamdulillahi dhul jalali wal ikram. All praise is due to God, the possessor of sublime majesty and breathtaking generosity. I am such a Muslim neighbor, and perhaps a kindred traveler wandering through the shared gardens and valleys of our world. When the terrain is particularly bleak and treacherous, turning my existential gaze to such resplendent souls is a source of renewal and hope. Archbishop Desmond Tutu has been one such glimmering beacon, embodying the best of religion, showing how people of spiritual fortitude are able to transform the world. Keenly observing Desmond Tutu for many decades, I recognize a living, loving archway, exemplifying some of the most capacious ways to be human. I celebrate him as a universal teacher, a holy friend, and a discerning guide, who, drinking from the sacred center, quenches the thirst of others, serving humanity as we yearn and work for a world of justice, love, and dignity for all living beings.
As I think back on the ways in which I have saluted our church's oldest living Archbishop Emeritus over the course of my life, my mind's journey returns time and again to prayer. Desmond Mpilo Tutu is for me synonymous with prayer and a reckless belief in God who answers and must answer prayer, and in particular, prayer for the marginalized and destitute. His prayer life is above all the thin but strong thread that characterizes him in all his varied ministries.
The focus of my essay in this book is how Tutu's spirituality shaped his identity. When I first entered the Tutu home, the image that greeted me was that of a sculpture, an embodied purple cassock, lying on the floor in a fetal position. I had heard stories of how he made it through those dark, dark days by beginning each day with lying on the floor in a fetal position, because he needed to remind himself that he was God's child. It was his simplest prayer. It fed, nurtured, and sustained him. It's the only thing that kept me going, he said. Sometimes it was so bad that the only thing I could do was remember that we are all God's children.
Indeed, it's important to acknowledge that we are all God's children, and that was a key aspect of the path towards the relatively peaceful elections on 27th April 1994, partly due to the National Peace Accord brokered by Tutu, as Liz Carmichael recollects in her essay in this book. However, while it might be tempting to use these examples of racial unity as an indicator of a racial reconciliation utopia that is achieved, John Allen, Tutu's authorized biographer, reminds us in his own essay in this book that in the 21st century, the rainbowism which Mandela and Tutu are purported to have advocated for has fallen on hard times. We have increasingly witnessed how the notion of reconciliation is deeply contested in South Africa.
Domain Solomons argues in his essay in this book that it may even be an absurd notion given the absurdity of apartheid. And other contributors even call it cheap reconciliation, as Nico Koopman reveals in his essay in this book.
The fact that forgiveness is until now in our country not accompanied by restitution is the reason for the suspicion of mainly black youngsters against Tutu and against his emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation. Ellen Busak rightly warns against the development where mainly white people embrace Tutu just like white Americans cherished Martin Luther King Jr. Tutu's emphasis on forgiveness and reconciliation was misused to only focus on forgiveness, rainbow unity, and reconciliation, and to neglect restitution. In the process, Tutu is domesticated by mainly white people and used as buffer between restitution and the perpetuation of white privilege and intergenerational racism and inequality. Busak pleads for the re-radicalization of Desmond Tutu.
In my essay in this book, I suggest that reconciliation is deeply limited as a concept to harness healing and effective pastoral care to victims and survivors of gender-based violence within the church. Why do victims and survivors of gender-based violence feel pressured by the church to forgive and reconcile with their perpetrators? How does Desmond Tutu's understanding of forgiveness encourage churches to promote unconditional forgiveness? Ultimately, I wonder if Archbishop Desmond Tutu's theology of reconciliation and restorative justice perpetuates gender-based violence, or does it offer the church a better opportunity to tend to its flock?
An exceptional number of contributions to this book focus on the concept of dignity, in particular as it relates to what Michael Battle has conceptualized as Tutu's Ubuntu theology. At the heart of Tutu's Ubuntu theology is the notion of justice.
My chapter for the book was called Ubuntu and Imago Dei, because these two cultural and theological frameworks and the ideas, thoughts, and principles that undergird them exemplify what my father tried to teach me about life, faith, and the best way of living. It is in these two concepts that my father's Christian faith and African identity are most clearly seen. I cannot start to describe how often we heard as children the call to be people with Ubuntu, or how often my dad reminded us that each person we encountered was the image of God and was worthy of respect and dignity for that very fact alone. When one of us would come home after a sports match bragging about how we scored the winning goal or blocked the other team's attempt to score, he would say to us, "Remember, umtu ngumtu ngabantu." He always tried to make us aware of the fact that we could not have scored or blocked that goal without the others.
Next to his Ubuntu ethic, without exaggeration, the most commonly described and praised attribute of the Arch, which appears in almost every single essay in this book, is his sense of inexplicable humor. As I ask in my own essay, of what use is a sense of humor for a people who walk daily in the valley of the shadow of death? Surely, humor and laughter is wasted on the wretched of the earth. Surely, those who travel up and down life's Jericho road in places where things constantly fall apart, have no time for humor. Surely, laughter should not be found in destitute villages and impoverished black townships. Surely, those reduced to mere worms by the apartheid system had no right to laughter. Not in the midst of all that squalor, poverty, violence, and repression. To put it differently, for a people under siege and a people under the yoke of oppression, humor and laughter seem such a wasteful luxury to cultivate and nurture. What is most fascinating and noteworthy about all the observations offered by authors in this book regarding Tutu's humor is that the purpose of the humor was never to humiliate, only to humanize.
Archbishop Desmond Tutu. A particularly beautiful scene with Tutu can still be found on the internet. Peter Dirk Uys, a South African satirist, is doing an impression of Tutu. Tutu himself is sitting in the first row of the audience, listening attentively. During the short speech that Uys gives imitating Tutu, the bishop's cap, one actually believes that one is looking at Tutu, his voice, the stretched syllables with which he gives his accent, the hands that hold together the words and the listeners. They are unmistakably Tutu's. And then, like the seal under the Tutu's speech, and instead of the liturgical Amen, he raises his fist and shouts, Amandla! The scene is so memorable because you all the time watch the real Desmond Tutu sitting in the first row of the audience, not only listening, but enjoying, clearly amused, delighted about the true-to-life imitation, the impression that was given by Peter Dirk Uys.
One of the life-changing encounters I had with Archbishop Desmond Mpilo and Archbishopess Leah Tutu was in 2011 when I spent some time with them at the Ecumenical Institute of Bose. After his inspiring presentation at the Ecumenical Center in Geneva, Switzerland, he was asked a few questions. One of the questions was about his becoming a Nobel Peace Laureate in 1984. His answer, just have a short name, Tutu, and a big nose. Humor not only creates an atmosphere for laughter and joy amidst otherwise gloomy and seemingly hopeless realities, it is also a necessary twist to turn the otherwise difficult conversation into a witty, thought-provoking one that can lead to praxis for social justice.
Apart from acts for justice, Archbishop Tutu is also known for speaking out quite strongly and sometimes with all the courage he could muster from his deep wells of righteous anger when encountering injustice. While the phrase "unmute yourself" is arguably the most popular refrain characterizing a COVID-19 world, the Archbishop was certainly not afraid to unmute himself during the heydays of the struggles against apartheid. Numerous contributions reveal that the Arch's sharp tongue matched his sharp humor and wit. The ELOF Commission was set up to investigate the finances of the SACC in the 80s, loosened his sharp tongue, as quite a few contributions reveal.
I learned to highly value Desmond Tutu during my time as head of the Evangelical Church in Germany Africa desk in the church foreign office. And I still do today. I remember his captivating charm and the way he helped us, that is, the EKD, find a way out of the exclusive one-way street relationship with the staunchly apartheid white Lutheran churches of South Africa. To grasp the full scope of his personality is not an easy thing. Not long after he had taken over from the white Methodist layman John Rees as General Secretary of the South African Council of Churches, he visited the church office of the EKD in Hanover. The issue under discussion was the financial support granted by the Church Development Service, KED, to SACC. The person responsible of KED and the EKD's financial officer wanted to conduct audits of the SACC accounts to see whether the KED's funds were being spent properly and under no circumstances on militant liberation movements. I knew Desmond Tutu before, but I had never seen him as enraged as he was that day. The EKD's request to vet the SACC finances in total disregard of all conventions and subtleties of ecumenical partnership and of the autonomy of SACC made his blood boil. With curt and harsh words, he dismissed this imposition.
It was in the German Protestant Kirchentag, 2007 in Cologne. I was part of a commission whose responsibility was to organize a whole day on overcoming violence. The World Council of Churches had announced the years 2001 to 2010 as a decade to overcome violence, churches seeking reconciliation and peace. Now, every day of the Kirchentag, the day was opened with a 1-hour Bible study. And we wanted to invite a real prophet of peace, a prophet of justice, to lead us through the day. It didn't take us long to agree on the name of Desmond Tutu. Well, the day in Cologne came. Everything was accurately planned in a very German way, of course. Every single minute of the whole day was scheduled in our script. The hall was packed with 5,000 people. We were all quite nervous. Well, then Tutu arrived, and he greeted me in the best spirit, providing a feeling of long-standing friendship. I was surely impressed. As the choir from South Africa started to sing for the bishop, which was not part of our script, but added spontaneously because they came along with the arch, he leaned towards me, whispering, "Fernando, what am I going to speak about today?" Well, at this moment, I really became nervous. So carefully, yet insistently, I tried to provide some general ideas. After a few minutes of whispering to him, he gently touched my arm to interrupt me, looked into my eyes with a gracious smile on his face and asking, "Are you trying to tell me what to say, young man?" I was lost for words. And then he gave the most inspiring speech, theologically sound, including political analysis, interpreting scripture, empowering in every regard, to stand up against injustice and violence wherever it may occur. Since he would illustrate all that wisdom by sharing stories of personal experience, the hour went by too quickly. When he was about to leave the stage, everyone was on their feet, cheering, blessing each other, and the choir was praising God. With a great brotherly hug and a trustworthy view in his eyes, we departed. No further words needed to be exchanged. The charismatic spirit of Tutu stayed with us during the entire day and beyond.
This book is a must-read for anyone interested in issues of justice, liberation, transformation, dignity, hope, joy, resilience, peace, prayer, and reconciliation. Using a variety of genres and with intergenerational contributors, it paints a multifaceted picture of an extraordinary ecumenist, priest, husband, father, intellectual, and politician Desmond Mpilo Tutu. The editors and contributors are to be recommended for sharing their rich, inspiring, and enlightening personal reflections of one of the most revered and important African of the 20th and 21st centuries. This publication is a befitting celebration of a very colorful life.
On behalf of the editors and authors, we wish to thank you for your interest in this book. Collecting the narratives of Ecumenical Encounters with Desmond Tutu in the shadow of a global health crisis, of gender-based violence, increased racism, black poverty, and political instability seems ironic because while many of the contributions in this book recollect a time decades before democracy, we are as a nation still reminded that much more needs to be done. Many scholars have noted that the COVID-19 pandemic did not create inequities in so much as it simply revealed and exacerbated existing injustices, causing some scholars like Jennifer Ruger to declare that we need a moral constitution for our planet's health. The ongoing question this book calls our attention to is, what will be the role of religion in drafting this moral constitution? In the words of the Archbishop, to oppose injustice and oppression is not something that is merely political. No, he reminds us, it is profoundly religious.
This continent is a home. My brothers and sisters, stand up and sing. Eduardo Montani is not gone. Frelimo, Frelimo, your eternal flame has shown us the light of dawn. A luta continua, continua. In Zimbabwe, mama, a luta continua, continua. In Botswana, a luta continua, continua. In Zambia, a luta continua, continua. In Angola, a luta continua, continua. In Namibia, a luta continua, continua. In South Africa, a luta continua, continua.
Oh, thank you so very much. Well done and congratulations, everyone. if we were in a hall together, I would say give yourselves a big round of applause. That was so beautiful, so beautiful to watch. And I heard just a little bit about how much effort went into that video, and it sounds like it was just a lot of work. So well done on pulling that off under the circumstances that you did. Thank you to every single contributor that spoke in that video. It was just so beautiful to watch. And I must say, just from my side, something about this video, something about this book, something about this entire project feels so sacred. It feels so sacred, so holy, and in many ways feels like just the right thing. It's what's supposed to be done, I don't know about other countries, but in South Africa, we talk sometimes about giving people their flowers whilst they're still with us. And in a small way, I think this is one of the ways in which we pay tribute and give flowers to Tata whilst he's still with us. So really, my heart is so moved. Thank you, everyone who was part of this. It was a really beautiful way for us to also get to know the book, get to know some of the authors, but also I think to hear a bit more about just how broad, how deep, how wide the Archer's legacy is for so many of us, and how he's touched us all differently. And I guess that's what we're going to be able to talk about and unpack this evening. So just to give a sense of what we're going to do in this half of the evening, I want to start by really opening up a conversation firstly with the editors. I did mention at the beginning that we would start with a bit of a discussion with the editors just to get a sense of the road to now, how we got here, what was involved in the process, some of their own reflections. And then I really want to open it up to you as some of the authors and contributors to really hear your own reflections. And I'll point some questions towards people just based on the themes that are coming up. For our participants who will not be able to speak necessarily, I do invite you to use the Q&A function. You should be able to see that at the bottom of your screen. Please do use the Q&A function to ask any questions that you want to ask. And we will also make sure that we can pull those into the conversation with our editors and contributors. Okay, and as I engage with you, I do ask that just to honor time, that we keep our responses to about 2 to 3 minutes. That's going to allow us to get as many voices as possible into the conversation. So I guess where I wanted to start is I wanted to ask our editors, what about this process of putting this book together? What about it struck you? What about the contributions from different people, their views, their perspectives, how they wrote about their relationship to the Archbishop? What about these contributions struck you, and what really jumped out at you? And I guess what I'd like to do is maybe invite our contributors to speak. And if I can maybe start with our Bishop-elect, Vicentia Jabe, then she can maybe get started and share with us some of the contributions that she felt really landed and resonated with her.
Thank you, Lovely. And one thing that I learned very quickly is that the Arch can write many volumes that can fill many libraries on different subjects. As we went through contributions, we realized it seems like we're scratching the surface. There's still more that can be written. But again, the stories that go far back, I guess some of us are not even yet born when some of the stories and the ministry of the Arch started to take shape and to really be formed. And to be here where we are now, he's 90, and I think this day is going to birth, or this birthday will birth another book into that on what we celebrate. So it has been a remarkable journey with other co-editors to see how much the Arch's life and ministry has transformed our lives and ministries.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. I would like to pass on quickly to Reverend Dr. Rudolph Hines, but before I do that, I've been told that the Arch would like to quickly wave at us, and we can wave back at him. So I want to ask if Reverend Mpho, if you wouldn't mind giving us 5 seconds Avuta does wave, and we will all wave back at him just to appreciate him before the end of the evening, before he has to hop off. Paul, can I check if you're able to get your camera on for us? Great, there we go. Thanks so much. That's so beautiful. Thank you, Art. Thanks, Mama Leah. So beautiful to see you. Thank you for your time. We so appreciate your gift. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thanks, Mpho. Thank you so much. Okay, fantastic. Now, those are the types of interruptions I like. If I can invite Rudolf Heinz to share with us what struck you about some of the contributions that came through as you put this book together. Do you want to unmute for us, please? Dr. Heinz, just unmute yourself for us.
No,
Thank you.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay.
You can go ahead, sir.
I can go ahead. Okay, what struck us? In the beginning, there was Edwin Arison, who started a fundraising campaign and wrote a mail to many friends in Germany. It was not so successful, I must confess. But when I discussed it with Dietrich Werner, we felt we should do something else or even more. And that was the start of the process to put together a book with contributions from South Africa and all over the world. It was a short time. We started really only in March, as it was said before. And we expected some 40 or so contributions, and we ended up with 72. That was certainly a lot of work, and I really have to praise all involved that they had kept the timelines. Wonderful. Why did we do that? For me, I can say I thank Desmond Tutu for all he did to further faith, justice, and dignity, not only in South Africa, but also in other parts of the world, not only in Germany, of course. We got contributions from Scandinavia, from the US, even from New Zealand. I don't know whether Paul Österreicher can now listen to us. It was wonderful, and I think we have to express our thankfulness. That's the main thing.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for that, sir. If I can maybe invite Professor Tinigo Maluleke to share with us some of his initial observations. What were the contributions that really jumped out at you as you were processing, going through this book?
Yeah, for me, it wasn't, to begin with, it wasn't the contributions per se, but it was just the energy of the editors. I mean, Sarojini had so much energy, and Rudolf and Dietrich, I don't know what they were eating. I don't know what they were smoking, Vicentia. They just had so much energy around this idea of putting this book out. And for me, that was very, very much inspiring indeed to work with colleagues who are so energized. But a few years back, I had written a short opinion piece titled Desmond Tutu, Archbishop of the World. And it seems to me, throughout the process, I was vindicated. This man is the Archbishop of the world, not the Archbishop of Cape Town. When I saw how many people from all over the world had very intimate encounters with him, which they could remember in detail. Even, listening today, people remember that he looked at me and he said this, and they remember word for word. So that for me was the most powerful thing, that he was living in the memories of so many people all over the world, so intimately and so powerfully.
Sure. Thanks, Prof. That's so powerful. The Archbishop of the World. I wonder if there's a way to facilitate that designation. Can we confer that tonight officially? I think that's a really powerful reflection. And I think, as you say, the project really has demonstrated that. If I can invite Dietrich Werner to share some of what resonated for him as you embarked on this process.
Just to echo something of what Tiniko just alluded to, the energy which really was at work within our group was not just, that certainly was a main motive to give honor to the Archbishop, who has been part of also my theological formative years in the 70s and 80s. But it was also this energy which was about the contribution to protect the ecumenical memory. I think the ecumenical movement sometimes suffer of a loss of ecumenical memory today. And so to feel this energy within our group and much beyond in the dialogue with the editors, that we want to contribute to protect the ecumenical memory, not just to honor the Archbishop, certainly, but particularly in order to protect also the integrity of the ecumenical vision for justice, for peace, and for the dignity of all. You know, just 300 meters from where I'm located right now in Berlin, Bread for the World, Protestant Development Agency, we have the remnants of the Berlin Wall, which divided the two parts of Berlin, East and West, and also two parts of Germany, and basically divided the whole world. And nobody would have expected in November earlier in the year 1989 that the wall would come down, which then happened. And after that, a leading member of the former Eastern Secret Police and military confessed we had anticipated everything, a violent insurrection, arms and tanks to be crushed, but we were not prepared to deal with the power of silent, peaceful prayers. We were not prepared to deal with the candlelight vigils of thousands assembled in Eastern German churches. I think it is about this power of prayer which can really change structures of injustice, which brings us together here. And Archbishop Desmond Tutu embodies this boldness of Christian hope, the insistency of prayer for justice and peace, and the resilience of Christian faith. And that is what both South Africa needs and the whole world needs today, this insistency of prayer, the insistency of hope for social and ecological transformation. Thanks a lot.
Thanks so much. Thanks so much, Reverend. And the piece you're raising about how we remember is something I do want to pay attention to tonight as well. So we're going to come back to that question of memory. How we remember is so, so important. So thank you for that addition. And then maybe just lastly, Prof. Nadar, if you can share with us what for you struck you as you were going through this process, putting this book together.
Thanks, Loveland. So yeah, the energy is definitely, I'm not sure it was always as high as Tiniko remembers. There were times when I wondered whether this was actually possible. But I'm really grateful. And again, for those of you that missed it, I'm really grateful to be holding the book in my hand this evening. And you can follow in the chat for how to get a hold of the book later. But just in terms of what stood out for me as we were editing Loveland, two things I would think. One is that throughout the book, unmistakably, people refer to the humor of Archbishop Desmond Tutu. It comes out in almost every piece, some more directly, like in Tiniko's piece and Fulata's piece, but in other chapters as well, it's always a subtext. And I do think that there's something there to explore further about, the role of humor in humanizing relationships. I think that's the one thing that struck me. The other thing was the ways in which the recollection, the memories that you are talking about, right? The ways in which those memories don't necessarily spotlight this the current pictures of the arch that we have, which is usually quite domesticated, as Nico Koopman says in his chapter, and I think Alan Bussack also refers to that, this the teddy bear of reconciliation, if you like. We see a Tutu that's strong and headstrong and calls out injustice and oppression right at its source, and deals with it in ways. I think someone in the book says, never in my life have I received such a verbal slap over the phone. So there's some wonderful recollections of a very feisty archbishop, and that's something that I'd like to take away as well. So thanks.
Beautiful, beautiful. And I think as you're sharing as an editorial team, so many people in the chat are just like, okay, we're getting our copies. We're going to order our copies, because it is so exciting to hear all the different angles that are coming out for you. So I guess even for us as the audience, there's so much interest to be taken there. So maybe let's jump into the substance, right? Let's jump into the substance of this work. In the clip where Bishop Kgabe was speaking, she was talking about, the three challenges facing the church, which the Archbishop stood quite strongly and loudly against. So at the time, it was about ending apartheid. That was the first big challenge. The second one was around the ordination of women. And then the last one that is referred to in that clip is the rights of LGBTQI people in the church. And so there's a reflection on, okay, apartheid has officially ended. So that box has been ticked. For the most part, we can ordain women in our churches, right? There's some conversation there, but generally that's the thing that has been achieved. But we're sitting here in a space where not everyone feels at home in the church, and not least members of the LGBTQI community. And so I guess what I'd like to invite as our initial reflection is, if we were to say, well, how is the church doing on these three challenges? What have we done so far? And perhaps now, what do we think are some of the main issues that are facing the church that maybe this book brings into the light for us? And I thought maybe we could start by inviting Bishop-elect Kgabe to speak to that. And then I'd also like to invite some voices from the authors. So maybe Reverend Renee August, if you'd like to add a voice there on some of the issues that the church is currently facing, and perhaps even Sis Nondombi, if she would like to also jump in there. So maybe Bishop Kgabe, if you can start off for us, and then we'll continue from there. Maybe unmute for us, please. Proverb of the last.
All right, I think am I mute now?
Yes, we can hear you.
Thank you. I think for what the Arch did on his consecration as the Archbishop of Cape Town and Metropolitan of Southern Africa was to put out the vision. And at that time, the three things that he had mentioned were a kind of stumbling block to all God's children. It said that the house is available for some and not for all. And so he was going to make sure that his ministry speaks to opening up the house of God. And I think secondly, what he did was that this was not only his vision, it is the vision that the church that he was to lead was to participate in making God's dream real of all of God's children sharing together in God's land and in God's space and time and all those kind of things. But one thing that I think it has taught us that the barriers that we move are not that strong. They are movable. We can conquer. If we make those barriers, it means we can dismantle those behaviors. It means that some are artificial. We're still part of a church, and this is not just talking about my denomination, but talking about the church as a whole, that still requires people to behave before they belong. And I think the Arch was just doing it away with that. You have to follow these rules and line. If not, you won't be part of us. And so the struggle still continues. The Arch has led the way. Many of the Arch's counterparts, those who are Arch's predecessors, have worked on that and successes to make sure that we continue to open this Church of God, ecumenical, and I think also in different religions where we find ourselves. So, Loveland, the barriers, we know that they can be moved. We need to club together and move the remaining one.
Yeah, that's a great metaphor and a great reminder that so many of the barriers that we create are movable, right? They haven't been there. They're not divinely instituted. We are the ones that have placed them there as humans, and we can move those. So thank you. That's a really powerful reflection. I want to check Reverend Renee August. Would you like to weigh in on this point and share some of your own reflections about these barriers and what are we facing and how have we been doing actually in challenging those barriers?
Thank you, Loveland. I think in the piece that I wrote, I entitled it Growing Up to Be a Child, because this idea that we are all God's children, leaves no room for exclusivity. And if it does, it begs the question, do we believe in other creators? And so within the Christian tradition, where this declaration of God is the creator of the universe and of all things, when we affirm that, we have to affirm that we are all God's children, which means we all belong to one another and we are all a part of the same family. And so similarly, as Bishop-elect Chabe said, these barriers that exist within the church, that yes, apartheid was the first one, and you yourself said, even though the legal part of apartheid has come to an end, there's systems that apartheid created that still exist today. Similarly, there are systems that patriarchal heteronormativity has created within the church. And those are the ones that, especially in the places where they intersect and oppress people, our own siblings, people from the LGBTQI+ community, all of God's children is welcome in God's house, at God's table. It is not our table, it is not our church. And the life of Archbishop Desmond reminds us not only of that reality, but reminds us in a way that invites us into relationship with one another, that invites us into a place of belonging. And so before I preach, I'll stop there.
Thank you. Such a powerful reminder, right? We're all God's children, but I really love the framing that it is not our table, it is God's table. Yeah. And so we don't get to decide who can show up and who can eat at that table or not. I think that's such a powerful reflection. And maybe from here, if I can bring in Sis Nontombi to actually speak to that point. So even in your contribution, so yours falls under the section where we're looking at even other theologies, how we connecting African spirituality to the legacy that the Arch has really become well known for. And I'd really love to hear some of your own reflections on this point. Yeah, what is the space, what is the scope to really broaden how we make sense of our faith, how we practice it in relation to other people? Yeah.
Yes, thank you. And I'm sorry for the darkness where I am. I think that for me, part of the challenge that faces us as the church is following from what Renee has just said, that our idea seems to be that the church follows the world, and that I think I blame Constantine, so that once the church became identified with the empire, we, rather than changing the empire, changed the church to align with empire. And that all the barriers that Bishop-elect Chabe spoke of come out of an alignment of the church with the world, rather than the church challenging the world to be a different place, a place where all of God's creation is valued and is welcomed into God's space. So I think that part of the learning for me out of being part of this process, but also being part of the process of being raised by my father, is that in fact, being on the outside is probably the best place to be, whether we are talking politically or economically, not because it's comfortable, but because it is the place that lets you see all the flaws. And as the church, we need to move outside of the structures, the political and economic power structures, so that we are the voices of those on the margins. And I think that is our biggest challenge, to stop wanting to be the institution and rather to live as the church.
Sure. Okay. Thank you. Thank you. To stop wanting to be the institution and to rather live as the church. Yeah, that's really, really beautiful and powerful. So thank you all for those reflections. And I guess this is a really nice way to pivot into the conversation around reconciliation, restitution. What does that mean? So when we have been part of doing harm, what does repair look like? And what is our role in that? And I guess, you know, as I was watching the video, as I was preparing for the conversation this evening, there was some reflections that struck me really hard that I wanted to deep dive a little bit into tonight. And I guess the first is, so back to this point on memory that was raised earlier on. The first is really to look at how we remember, yeah? And I think both Dr. Nico Koopman and Dr. Alan Busak speak a bit about how we are remembering someone like the Archbishop Tutu, you know, how he has been sometimes in the way he's been remembered, domesticated is the word used in, I think, in Koopman's reflection. Sarojini spoke about the teddy bear effect when we look back on that. And I think there's value here for us to unpack that. So in the context, at least for South Africa, but I think so many other countries in the world who have had to go through some kind of forgiveness, reconciliation, restitution process, there's something about the names that we draw on, the names that we invoke when those conversations emerge. And so I'm wondering, Dr. Koopman, if I can maybe invite you to start off. Can you first paint a picture for us about what is this selective remembering that we've been doing? Why is it dangerous? And how does that impact how we look at the work that the Arch has done in our time?
Thank you, Loveland. Great communing with you and all our beloved present in different ways here. No, I think it's correct. We must remember rightly. And I fear that we can misunderstood the legacy of our Arch on this specific point. Throughout his life, Archbishop Emeritus Tutu emphasized what I would like to call, in line with the ecumenical movement, costly unity, costly love, costly forgiveness. By that, I mean it's a forgiveness that longs for, that hungers for confession of wrongs. It hungers for contrition. It hungers for repentance, for remorse, for reparation, for restoration, for restitution, and for healing, reconciliation. In our country, we have witnessed, we have seen a lot of forgiveness by so many South Africans. Name them, personified by the Tutus, the Madibas, the Tambus, people on grassroots level, marginalized people, people who were wronged. A lot of forgiveness was offered. And the future of this country is dependent upon do we respond appropriately to the gift of forgiveness? And the Tutu logic is clearly one that says, I invite you, really do you make my forgiveness cheap? The forgiveness that we have witnessed in this country will become cheap if it's not accompanied by restitution. And therefore, our focus in South Africa should be on restitution. That's the appropriate response to the Tutus of this world, of our country. That is the imperative for South Africans' Loveland, I would believe.
Yeah, absolutely. Right. Part of this work is not to cheapen the gift of forgiveness. And it is quite an expensive gift. Yeah. And so the invitation being, how do you respond to my forgiveness? And what I'm hearing from you, Dr. Koopman, is that the appropriate response should have been restitution. And I think there's time still for that to become the appropriate response that we invite into this conversation. Thank you for that. I just want to check if Dr. Alan Busak is with us and if he'd be willing to also contribute a bit to this. You know, the example of the Martin Luther King and Tutu making that synonymous is one that emerges out of some of your work. And I'm wondering if you want to add your voice into this aspect of the conversation as well. As Dr. Busak, has he left us? I'd seen him on earlier. Okay, all right. No, that's perfectly fine. We'll continue and move on then from that. I mean, there were a few other authors that wrote about this and spoke to this. So I had noted some of the commentary from Domain Solomons in his piece, where he also was really questioning how we think about reconciliation in our context. And then there was a really sort of different but similar reflection where I'd seen Michael Lapsley had written his piece around brokenness and wholeness, and situating that in his relationship with the arch. So maybe if either of you would like to speak into this piece, I'd love to hear your voices, and then we can move on to getting some voices from other parts of the world into this conversation. Domain, Michael, do either of you want to speak?
Thank you, Loveland. Yeah, I think from my side, when thinking about reconciliation, to a large extent, I think reconciliation as you know, is counterintuitive. It's a counterintuitive impulse. It does not come naturally, at least not for me. And in this sense, I'm oftentimes asking the question when reflecting on this contentious concept, whether Tutu is not setting the bar too high in terms of the expectations, and, you know, especially as epitomized through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission. And what I wanted to do with my piece and ended up doing was to connect two central aspects, speaking to my interpretation of Desmond Tutu as the priest, you know, social activist and leader, but also the meaninglessness captured under what I describe as the South African predicament. So how do we reconcile, you know, Tutu and his labors of love and the meaninglessness that sometimes describe the situation in South Africa in this way? I compare Desmond Tutu to the figure in Greek mythology, Sisyphus, charged to push a boulder up a mountain, only to see it roll down over and over again. Now, it's a metaphorical loop that's repeated over and over again. What I'm trying to say or argue with that is reconciliation is done and needed over and over again. There's no such thing, I believe, as a state of reconciliation. And as an existentialist, for me at least, you know, that's a theological and political anomaly. The romantic state of reconciliation, as we often talk about in South Africa, does not exist. But of course, we need not be hopeless. It's not a fatality, as some would argue. You know, and when reflecting on someone like Albert Camus and what he says about Sisyphus, and I see Desmond Tutu in the same way, amidst all of this meaningless and absurdity that we call the South African predicament, we must imagine Sisyphus happy. And I think to a large extent, Desmond Tutu really epitomizes, the difficulties associated with reconciliation. And of course, some of the previous authors spoke about that reconciliation should not be cheapened. And I think in appreciating reconciliation for what it is, we develop a richer understanding of what it is about. And then we realize just how difficult it is and not just use it willy-nilly as we often do in South Africa. So in a sense, that's what I try to capture in my chapter.
Thank you so much for that. Thanks so much for that, Domain. And I guess one of the long-standing awkward conversations about restitution that we are faced with today is not just in South Africa, but it's the issue of Israel and Palestine, right? It's framed often in very controversial terms, right? Some look at it and think war. Some look at Palestine, Israel, and think, ooh, division of the house of God. And we know that one of the key features of both the anti-apartheid struggle, but even after that, and in the pronunciations of Archbishop Tutu, has been a strong and solid sense of connection and solidarity to the plight of people in Palestine. And so there are few people who even in this work have looked at that, have reflected on that. And so I guess I'd like to start by inviting Dr. Ulrich, I don't want to butcher your surname, sir, Dr. Ulrich Dutro, to offer your own initial reflections on your piece and what was behind your own thinking in putting that section together.
Thank you so much. The name is Ducho. That's very difficult internationally. Okay, I'm very surprised. Just a minute ago, you asked me to make a note on this. The reason why you did that is that in my presentation in the book, I said that I'm so moved that Desmond Tutu is doing this kind of work, not just in his own context. We worked together in anti-apartheid struggle, but he used that kind of experience and power for the present struggle of justice. And the key is in this situation that there is a similarity, and there is one here in the room, and that is Brian Brown, who just wrote a book exactly on this theme, the apartheid of that time and the apartheid in Palestine, Israel. And but he may elaborate on that. But what I wanted to say is that also Desmond Tutu, in his capacity, in his credibility, used this credibility to write to the German church leaders a letter, knowing the situation in Israel-Palestine, but also in Germany, that Germany is more looking at itself and its past, and using that not to be present in the struggle for justice in Israel-Palestine. So he wrote in a kind of really, I mean, intensive, moving way, please join the struggle of the worldwide Kairos movement, Kairos Palestine, Global Kairos for Justice. Join, because when Palestine will be free, also Israel will be free.
Sure, and you know, as you say that when Palestine will be free, Israel will be free, in many ways it still sits within that understanding of Ubuntu, right? Recognizing that my freedom is linked to your freedom, and that there's no way that one of us can be free. One of us can stay oppressed and the other will be experiencing true and complete freedom. I mean, I think that's a really beautiful way to frame how we reflect on that situation. I want to check, Brian Brown, are you with us? I'd love to hear a little bit more about your contribution on this matter, especially just knowing that there's a reference now to some of the work that you've just released around this topic.
Surely. Great to be with friends old and new. And thank you for this admirable moment and the book which we celebrate and the man behind the book. And if I were engaging with the man behind the book at this moment, I think I would remonstrate with him and say, how bad you are, the Arch, at selective justice, because you don't do selective justice at all well. And so many of my church leader friends of today and of yesterday are admirable in their implementation of selective justice. They have a cause, an issue, and they pursue it diligently, but they don't do gays and lesbians, do they? Or they go with passion into their definitive cause, but they don't do Palestine, do they? And so it is this selectivity of justice that I sense needs to be redeemed. And Desmond Tutu is the one who epitomizes the non-selectivity, the comprehensiveness of justice, and the constancy of justice. And I would boast that I know the mind of Tutu before it is expressed. Because if the expression is what pertains to justice today, I can anticipate what the Arch is going to say. It is the pursuance of justice. And just quickly and anecdotally, traveling on a train with him once here in the UK, he talked about the indivisibility of freedom. And of course, with that whimsical, humorous, impish way, he said, Brian, and in case you don't know it, I happen to be white, he said, Brian, you can never be free until I am free. And until I am free, you are unfree. Well, it took a bit of stomaching, the fact that I was unfree, good heavens. But of course, he was right, as he invariably is. And just as we have touched on the indivisibility of freedom, the indivisibility of justice is the imperative. And that's what my book is about. And I'm not going to give it a title because I'm not going to try to promote my book now, but Ulrich mentioned it, so I'm endorsing it. And all I'm saying is that the indivisibility of justice is what we need to recall. And it is not only constant, it is, yes, it's enduring. And what Desmond has done to me is to make me disentitled to retire, because the pursuance of justice doesn't come with retirement, he tells me. And my wife doesn't like that.
Oh dear, oh dear. I think the Arch is going to put a lot of us into trouble for a very, very, very long time. Thank you. No, I think even just the reflection, right, on the indivisibility of justice, another way that people speak about that is intersectionality, right? It's a word that's become really a lot more popularized in our context now, but it is that reflection. And I think any leader in a struggle against injustice has understood this, that there is no version of splitting and slicing and dicing ourselves away from each other. And I think that your connection to the fact that means that we can always anticipate what the Arch's response would be to a matter of justice, because his stance has always been so clear. I think that's something that even for me as a younger person, I would say, even though I didn't get to connect with the Arch, I guess as intimately as many of you have, that is one thing that I really, really honor about the work that he has done. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I guess in the spirit of intersectionality, this is where I really want to pivot us to really look at this question of solidarity. Yeah. So a lot of people in the book have looked at the Arch's practice of solidarity, whether that was a transnational solidarity, whether it was solidarity across multiple issues at the same time. And one of the areas I really want to focus on is around gender. Yeah, so I know that we have a Wilma Jacobson on the call, and I know that she was, if I'm not mistaken, one of the first, if not the first woman who was ordained by the Arch. And I think that there's something about that experience that is so important to share on a platform like this for us to really hear that. So 29 years ago, the first woman to be ordained by Archbishop Tutu. Wilma, I don't know if you'd like to share a little bit about how just the Arch's approach to your ordination, but even broadly to the conversation about women in the clergy, how that has shaped you and impacted your contribution to this work today. Just unmute for me.
Yes.
There we go.
Thanks so much, Loveland. I'd love to, in part because it was 29 years on the 29th last week. So it's really quite fresh, quite now. And also a joy because of Bishop-elect Khabet, sort of the news coming pretty much at the same time of that initial ordination so long ago now. My goodness, I've written about it, but the Archbishop Tutu has been perhaps one of the strongest influences in my life when it comes to ordination and expression of priesthood, because I ended up, because I was a deacon for 4.5 years before I could become a priest. I was often behind the scenes in, preparing for a service as the deacon reading the gospel. And so I had these moments and vignettes of moments with him when I was just always the deacon because I never moved on. And so that, in fact, gave me a chance to get to know him and to hear from the from the get-go his complete support for women's ordination. In the chapter, I say it was 5 days into his consecration as Archbishop when he gave me an appointment. And I was a new seminary student, wondering what he thought about the ordination of women. And before I could even say why I wanted to see him, he just said, I suppose you want to know what I think about the ordination of women priests. And that was the truth, because it wasn't clear from the media. I was in the US at the time, so it wasn't clear. So I needed clarity, and he gave me clarity right back at that moment in 1986. And he didn't waver from that clarity. And it was broader than ordination. It was not just women need to be priests, the church needs women priests. It was about representation of women in leadership positions. It was about empowering lay women. It was a much broader struggle. And I think he was one who got it and who encouraged all of us to do the work we did. We didn't always agree about the how we were to get there. And I write about that also in the chapter. And that in itself led to a relationship that is deep because we didn't always agree. And because we had to work through some things to a point where we knew we supported each other completely in the end result. But it's more than just ordination, right? It's how one is a priest. So having been his chaplain and seen him firsthand, what others have talked about, his prayerfulness. But I was thinking about the global reach, basically the global reach of his theology, of his justice, of the comprehensiveness of his justice and his global understanding of the world and of all, which I also have in my chapter. That is what has, I think, quite possibly influenced me the most. I come from a global family in many ways. And so I think I just fell into, it was delight, his understanding of God is in the world. We are in the world. We are all God's children, whoever you are. And that is such a strong influence for me. And that's what, I guess, that passion that he has, it's my passion. He passed it on. I took it on, and I still have it. And that's what drives me and others, and so many of us, to say all God's children, until all God's children are in the church and welcomed in the church. For instance, we aren't there. So I'll start by saying my last bishop, Bishop Mary Gray Reeves in the US, said this: we are becoming the church that doesn't yet exist. The church that doesn't yet exist, where everyone is welcome at the table. And that is essentially what I think Archbishop Emeritus Tutu did, is helped us to try and drive us towards this imagination. We're imagining this church that doesn't yet exist, of restitution, not just forgiveness, or of forgiveness and restitution and global acceptance and global belonging as God's people and God's children.
That's beautiful. Yeah. We really are doing the work to create a world that we have not yet lived in. And I think that is it's a worthwhile exercise for us to embark on together. I'm so aware of our time, but I want to sneak in one last point to end us off on quite a high note. I know that so many people have referred to Archbishop Desmond Tutu's humor and how that's connected to some of the work on social justice that we know him for. And so I'd like to invite maybe just one or two of our authors to share their most hilarious memory of their interactions with the Archbishop. Trond has said he would love to share something, so I'd like to give you an opportunity to just share that with us before we wrap up this part. Thanks, Trond. Just unmute for me, Trond. There we go.
Okay, thank you. Well, I remember from the Cathedral of Oslo, he came into the pulpit and talked about how wonderful God is, and then he asked us how we would respond to this. And as Norwegians, we are quite, we don't shout in church. So we said something quite quiet, and he listened and made us shout. And in one of the churches up in the north of Norway, he asked 900 people to stand up on the chairs in the church, on the benches, and shout, "We love South Africa." And then they danced down the aisle with him when he left the church. So if one of the Norwegian bishops had tried to do something like that, I think nothing would have happened. But with him, everything happened. And through his sense of humor, he gave us also a new image of God, which was so important to us. And I think it contributed to changing our church. When he says and uses images like God does not fold God's hand and look on. No, God acts, and God acts through us. And I think, I believe that his sense of humor also contributed to the fall of apartheid. Because through that he made a bridge where he never forgot about justice is always necessary.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Oh, that's beautiful. Thanks so much, Trond. That phrase that you said, where you said that the arch changed how you understood the image of God. I mean, that hit me in my chest. I mean, it's so beautiful, right? When that's the impact that someone has on us. Sorry, Gina, I apologize. I want to squeeze in Fernando, his last little story, and then I'm going to hand back to you. Go ahead, Fernando.
Thank you so much. Just very, very brief. I mean, I've shared more in the book, and you can read that. But one of my last encounters with the Arch was really at the Vrije Universiteit in Amsterdam. Desmond Tutu was invited to be part of a PhD inauguration, and it was a defense, and officially, and everything was, we were all dressed up in our nice robes, and all these white professors, and of course everybody was around Desmond Tutu, the only black person basically present. And so as the protocol tells us, very stiff, following the rules, everybody is really serious and stiff, and no mistakes. And we have done this for hundreds of years like this, and we continue to do it, and so on and so on. It was quite, I must say, I already felt like, because the Arch was present, I felt a bit uncomfortable, I must say, because it was like, I somehow felt that he was, okay, he's playing this with us, fitting in as much as he can, and so on. well, the whole show went on, and it was great. And somebody was, as we were leaving the aula, you know, with big praise and so on, all of a sudden, you know, before we left the aula, the arch was shouting out loud with laughter, and it was such a surprise. But this laughter, I mean, he was serious as we were, and he followed the protocol, and I mean, it couldn't have been better. But with this laughter, he broke the ice. He broke, you know, it was like, and he was just shouting like, "You guys are really serious about this, aren't you?" And with that comment and with his laughter, I mean, it was all with that one thing. It was in the room, you know. Do you really reflect on your whiteness? Are you ever planning to decolonize this university? What are you actually doing here? Is this theater going on forever or what? So that was it was one of those brilliant moments, you know, where he just needed one sentence and one laughter with humor, but the message came across. Thanks.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. On that note, I must close off, but I want to thank each and every one of you. This has been incredible to hear your testimonies, to hear your own reflections. So much happening in the chat where people are also just appreciating all that you've shared. There was a short message Renee Auger shared with me, one of her stories with the arch. He was asleep in a bed in England, and he was woken up by a thud. He looked to see if my Leah was okay, but then he realized that he had fallen off the bed, right? It's just all these incredible stories about someone that we love and hold in such high regard, but also just seeing his humanity and how that has not just shaped us, but our relationship to each other and ultimately our relationship to the divine. So on that note, I'm going to hand back to Prof. Sarojini Nadar to move us towards the closing. Thank you so much, Saroj.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Loveland. Having only received the book, I think 2 or 3 weeks ago, you really did your homework. I think we all can agree that Loveland has done an amazing job of facilitating this conversation. Thank you so much, Loveland. Lots of appreciation for that. And then, of course, in the video, we did run up the acknowledgements. I can't go through them now. They are in the book, and you would have seen them on the video, but just a huge thank you to our authors and our editors for the incredible work that you did in bringing this book to fruition. I just express my sincere gratitude to all of you. I do want to say 2 things. Loveland, you asked me at the beginning, asked the editors what struck us about this process. And the one thing that I didn't say was that apart from the wonderful recollections we have from people who are themselves in the 7th, 8th, and even 9th decades of their lives, apart from that, what was unique about this book is that we included a range of younger contributors. So I'm really proud that we were able to include people who had never themselves met the arch before, but they've been so inspired by his work, and that is really the future, as we say. So I'm really grateful for that, and I want to acknowledge all of you in the room. And then all books come with their limitations. And so one of the things I wanted to say was that we did conceptualize the concept of ecumenical beyond the unity of Christian churches, right? So we tried to conceptualize, and you'll see that in the call for papers. And so we invited people of other faiths. We also invited people, to reflect on religious diversity, particularly because, I mean, the Arch has a book called God is Not a Christian, right? Unfortunately, we weren't as successful in getting contributions, a number of contributions from people of other faiths, and perhaps that's saying a lot. And there's more work to be done in the ecumenical movement in making our table bigger and more welcoming, I think. And so I want to leave you with that challenge. The final thing I want to say is that you would have seen on the chat that periodically we've been posting information on how to get the book. I want to say that I just love, it's the only copy available at the moment, this proves, so I love holding it. But I want to say that the book, the e-version is open access, so it's free, especially to our students in the room, that's free. But if you are like me, older, not old, just older, and like to hold a real book in your hand, there is information in the chat being pasted about how to order the book, etc. Our publishers are in the room. So, and I do want to also say thank you to our publishers, Regnum Books at Oxford and UWC Press here in Cape Town, South Africa. Right, okay, so that's all I wanted to say now. You've heard this entire evening about Bishop-elect Visentia Kgabe. Now, I want to tell you one secret, and that is that it's not a secret, it's her birthday today, so we can really celebrate. She's now you know, I think she's in line. I'm not, maybe we could prophesy this as well, since it's the Archbishop's birthday on the 7th of October. It's Visentia's birthday today. Are you seeing the pattern here? Just saying, just saying. But Visentia, on behalf of all of us, we want to say happy birthday. We want to end with two songs from UWC Choir. The first is Malibongwe. It's a famous song. It's sung in South Africa. Igama Lama Koskasi Malibongwe, which means praise be to women. And that's especially for you, Visentia. And then you would have seen that when UWC Choir was they had to, of course, record their performance for tonight. They broke out in spontaneous song. It is the cutest thing ever, wishing Archbishop Emeritus Desmond Tutu happy birthday. So we are also going to play out with that song. So please stay online for those two songs by UWC Choir, if you can. And Mpho, if Tata is still watching, we really hope he gets to see the happy birthday song. Thank you again to everyone for your participation. Stay in contact, and again, get the book. Thanks again. Lots of love, everyone. Lots of love and light.
Ikamala makosi kazima libongwe, malibongwe, 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 malibongwe. Ikamala makosi kazima libongwe, ikamala makosi kazima libongwe, malibongwe. Malibongwe, 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 libitso la bafuma hadi halibongwe, libitso la bafuma hadi halibongwe, 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 halibongwe. Ikamala makosi kazima libongwe, ikamala makosi kazima libongwe, malibongwe, 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 ikamala makosi kazima libongwe.
This is the point at which everybody would ululate if we were in the audience. So one more happy birthday song. Yay. Okay, and we're going to end with the happy birthday Tata song.
Sorry, if I remember correctly, it's on the program. It says there's a prayer. And then,
oh my goodness! yes, yes. Oh my goodness. I am so sorry. I am so sorry. We were going to get our bishop-elect to close in prayer. Thank you so much. Sorry, it's been a long, long, long day. Bishop-elect, yes, we were going to ask you to close in prayer for us. Vicentia.
I thought that praise song for women was a prayer. So I will do it. Yeah. Today being St. Francis Day, I thought that it'd be apt that we close with a prayer of St. Francis, which speaks to the themes of this book. So let us pray. Lord, make us instruments of your peace. Where there is hatred, let us sow love. Where there is injury, pardon. Where there is discord, union. Where there is doubt, faith. Where there is despair, hope. Where there is darkness, light. Where there is sadness, joy. Grant that we may not so much seek to be consoled as to console, to be understood as to understand, to be loved as to love. For it is in giving that we receive, it is in pardoning that we are pardoned, and it is in dying that we are born to eternal life. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, Hardy.
Molo Tata, Ngusibusiso Njeza, the conductor of UWC Creative Arts Choir, and these are members of the UWC Creative Arts Choir, students from the university that you've led for so many years. On your special day, your 90th birthday, we wish you all the best. We wish you a longer life. We still need your wisdom. We have a special song for you. Hope you will enjoy it.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you again. Have a wonderful evening. I see that Edwin Harrison has also posted some information in the chat about the peace lecture happening on Thursday. Hope we can keep the celebrations going the whole week. All the best and good night. God bless.